Story time about the psycho neighbor that stalked me. So, when I graduated college, I moved into a new apartment. When I first got there, I was moving my things in, and my neighbor introduced himself and helped me move a couple of things upstairs. After we had got done, he asked for my number, but I told him I wasn't really looking for a relationship. But he said, let's just swap numbers just in case, a fire happens. So I gave him my number, and I really didn't think nothing of it. Maybe a week later, he starts knocking on my door and giving me gifts just about every day, like teddy bears and flowers. Then maybe about 2 weeks later, I told him to stop because I wasn't really interested in him. So the next day, I wake up to make coffee and take out trash. When I pass my living room, the teddy bear gift that my neighbor gave me makes a click noise. When I quickly rip the teddy bear open, it's a camera inside. Like for part 2 about the psycho neighbor that stalked me. So, like I said earlier, the teddy bear gift that my neighbor had gave me makes a clicking noise. When I quickly rip the teddy bear open, it's a camera inside, and I go into a panic mode. Out of nowhere, there's a knock on my door, and it's my neighbor. He says, "Good morning, it's me again. You left your trash too close to the curb, so I moved it for you." I realized that my door was still open, so I try to run over and lock the door, but he just opens it. I yell at him, telling him to get out. He closes the door behind him and says, "That's no way to talk to a neighbor." I start backing up. He looks over and sees that I ripped the teddy bear apart. I didn't know what else to do, so I just ran to my room. And he chases after me and pulls my hair. Like for part 3. Part 3 about the psycho neighbor that stalked me. So, he comes in, I run into my room, and he chases after me. Before I could get up, he pulls onto my hair and starts dragging me towards the kitchen. I saw the coffee that I had made earlier, and I was able to pick it up and throw the hot coffee in his face. He starts screaming loud, and I took that chance to run into my room and lock the door. I immediately start calling the police, and from there, it sounded like he ran out of my apartment. When the cops came, they're doing an investigation, and all the gifts that he gave me all had cameras in them. And when I told them about my neighbor, they did some digging, and come to find out, that man wasn't even my neighbor. He didn't even live at the apartment complex. This is the reason why girls lie about having a boyfriend when guys try to talk to them. Last week, there was a woman in Harlem, New York, and she was brutally attacked by a man after turning him down. This 31-year-old mother went to go buy a bottle of wine after work. 2 men walked in the store, and one of them offered to pay. And she politely declined and said no thank you and that she could pay for it for herself. When she got ready to walk out, the men basically said that she thinks she's better than them. The men followed her out and threatened that what was she going to do about it. So she tried to ignore them and go about her day. Then they chased her across the street, kicking her, and one of the men tried to bite her eye out, but ended up biting her forehead, leaving a deep wound. She was screaming, and she just wanted to get her daughter. Story time on how I accidentally joined a cult. And the guy who was the head leader, I soon found out that he was a pedophile. At the time, I just graduated high school and I was not planning on going to college. So all I really did was work. At my job, I met this guy, and we're going to call him Devin. Devin was sweet, but he was so into spirituality and connecting with God. We started talking, then dating, and he asked me if I could come to his church. And when I was younger, I used to go to church, but I stopped going. No real reason why, but I thought it was my calling to reconnect with God again. When we go to his church / AKA the cult, when I first go in, there's like 10 people in the church, and it was run down. It looked like we were in someone's house. When we walked down the aisles, Devin introduced me to their head leader, which they called Father God. He told me that my clothes were too revealing, and he literally slapped my ass and laughed. Like for part 2. This is part 2 of how I accidentally joined a cult, and the guy who was head charge was a pedophile. So like I said earlier, we met his pastor, which they called Father God. The first thing he do is basically say that I look like a slut because of the clothes I was wearing, and slapped my ass. I looked at Devin, the guy that took me to their church, aka the cult. He laughs and tells their Father God that next time he would tell me about their dress code. After that, we go sit down, and I tell him that I was ready to go. He tells me to hold on and just please listen to the service. Anyways, when their father God starts service, he goes in about women and what they should wear, tell them the only way to be a pure woman is to obey their man, and blah blah blah, and dress godly. Just the most insane things ever. And everyone in there were like hypnotized and catching Holy Ghosts, jumping up and down, rolling on floors, passing out, crying. Their father God calls me up and asks if he could use me as an example. When I stand up, he feels on my breast saying that I'm a temptation for married men. Like for part 3. Story time on how I cheated all throughout high school and got valedictorian. Now, this story time is not to encourage others to cheat. I just want to explain how I did it. So, when it came to high school education, I cared less about actually learning the material they taught in school, but more about getting a good grade. So, if you're like me, this video is for you. In school, I created a bunch of friends with all types of people, but not just anyone, but with people that had the same class with me. Even if they weren't in the same class period, if I knew we had the same teacher, guarantee you were on my roster of friends. In the beginning of the year, I sort of created an agreement with each friend when it came to things like homework, classwork, projects, and especially tests. Also, I cheated over 95% of my tests and scored high. I really want to get into details, but I'm running out of time. Please come back for a part 2 if you want to know how I did that. This is part 2 of how I cheated all throughout high school and got valedictorian. So, like I said earlier, I created agreement with each friend. Now, we never had a discussion over who was doing what work, but I had specific friends for English homework, math, tests, etc. I was always involved in group chats for each class, and because I was friends with everyone, I was able to trade what I needed with what they needed. I would trade homework that wasn't even a class I was taking in for test answers. So it was like a win-win, and I always had backups just in case someone didn't have them. But those things mainly came in handy for homework, classwork. Now, when it came to things like tests, like I said earlier, I cheated over 95% of my tests, and I always scored high. Also, by the way, I never studied, and let's get into how I did that. Running out of time, wish TikToks were longer. Come back for part 3. This is part 3 of how I cheated all throughout high school and got valedictorian. When it came to things like tests, I cheated over 95% of them and always scored high. Also, by the way, I never studied, and I never got caught. I'm going to expose, so hopefully there's no teachers watching this. I had 3 methods of cheating. Number 1 was either one of my friends would take a picture of the test or get the picture of the test from someone else and send it to me, and I'd write codes for what answers were. So like if the answer was apple, I'd write AP for short, so even if I did get caught, the teacher wouldn't even know what the little paper meant. Alright, number 2. I also cheated by sneaking a picture of the test myself, then pretending that I needed to go to the bathroom or the nurse because I felt sick, when in reality, I was in a hallway looking up the answers on my phone. My 3rd cheating method was my ultimate way of cheating, just in case the first 2 wouldn't work. I'm running story time about how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. So, me and my husband were high school sweethearts. He was very kind, very in tune about my feelings, and we were like best friends. We never really did anything sexual because he didn't want our relationship to be like that. We were together for 6 years, waited until marriage to lose our virginity to one another. The year before getting married, I noticed he would stare at guys a lot, but I would never really think anything about it because at least he was not looking at girls. Fast forward, we get married, and 2 years later, I get pregnant, and we were both excited. When I get to the doctors, I get my yearly test done for STDs, of course, but as always, I'm clean. Maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, I get a call from the doctor saying I tested positive for HIV. Let me know if you guys want a part 2. Part 2 of how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. Like I said earlier, 2 weeks later, I get a call from the doctor saying I tested positive for HIV. I was shaking and crying, and I was so in shock. And the only thing I ever heard about HIV at the time was that I only had a couple months to live. I couldn't believe the only man that I've ever been with gave me this disease. I thought I was doing everything right, the right way, and still ended up being in a hole. I was so nervous to confront my husband because I didn't think it was like him to cheat on me, and I thought maybe he thought I was cheating. So the next day I pretended everything was fine. I lied to him and told him that my phone died and that I needed his to call my mother. He gave me his phone. I went into the bathroom and immediately I start snooping. As I'm going through his phone, I didn't see any text from girls. So I'm like, maybe the doctor got the wrong test. I'm running out of time. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. So, like I said, I went to his phone and I didn't see any text from other girls. So, I'm thinking maybe the doctor called the wrong person. Anyways, I gave up on looking through his phone and I just talked to him. I sat him down and told him that I had HIV and that I haven't cheated on him ever. He looked at me and cried. He broke down in tears and apologized. I got so upset with him because I realized that he did cheat on me and I was really upset for our unborn child. So I took all of his clothes, I took his things, and I threw them all out. Right before I kicked him out, I yelled at him saying, "Who was the girl that gave it to you?" And he told me it wasn't a girl. It was his friend David.